Right. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going to take a look at a proposed wind farm in Lancashire called Scout Moor 2. It's quite a controversial topic locally, and it really kind of throws up some big questions about, how we balance, I guess, the drive for renewable energy with protecting our, local landscapes and our heritage, the environment, and things like that. So it should be a really interesting deep dive.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating one because there are so many different aspects to this, and we've got a great source for this one. We've been talking to a resident of Norden, a village near Rochdale, which would be very much on the front line of this proposed wind farm. So we're going to dig into that interview and see what we can find out.
Yeah, and I think it's a good one for us because, as well as all the kind of local issues, it really throws up these bigger questions about, energy policy in the UK and globally as well. So it's a chance to kind of zoom out a bit and have a look at those wider issues. And also as well, just to give you a bit of a preview, we're going to look at some interesting financial filters. And I think there might be some surprises in store on that front as well. So let's get stuck in, shall we? So Scout Moor 2, what's actually being proposed here?
So this is a proposed extension to an existing wind farm, the original Scout Moor wind farm, which is it's called, kind of up on the moors, above Rochdale, between Rochdale and Rawtenstall. And the proposal here is basically to add a lot more, much bigger turbines to the existing site. And we're talking considerably bigger. These would be huge, up to 180 meters tall.
Yeah, that is a pretty big turbine, isn't it? I mean, to give you a sense of scale, that's
the tallest Blackpool tower.
Yeah, it's a landmark structure. Yeah. And one of the other interesting things that our source mentioned was that the developer Cubico, they're potentially looking to sell the company in the not too distant future, and so there is quite a lot of pressure and momentum behind getting this planning application submitted and approved.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a few questions about the way the whole thing's been handled as well. In terms of consulting with local communities. There's been a bit of a backlash about that, hasn't there?
Yeah, they've recently concluded a second round of public consultation.
Yeah.
But the initial consultation, it seems, was pretty inadequate in the eyes of some residents, particularly in Norden, one of the villages that would be most affected by this proposal.
Yeah. I mean, what did our source say? They said it came out of nowhere, really. As far as we're concerned, we didn't really get a lot of advance notice, and the original consultation was very much lacking. For instance, they didn't have any sessions in our village, which is one of the two places going to be most affected by it. Yeah. And I think it's that kind of lack of early engagement that really does tend to,
fuel opposition to these sorts of developments. People feel like it's a done deal from the outset, and they haven't had a chance to properly make their views known.
Yeah, and that is going to become a theme, isn't it, as we go through this? But let's move on now and talk about some of the more kind of specific issues with Scout Moor 2. And one of those, this development would
impact on a site off
considerable historical significance.
The Cotton Famine Road. Yeah, that's right. The proposed site for Scout Moor 2. It basically surrounds a significant stretch of this road, which is part of a wider route called Really Moor Road. And the Cotton Famine Road, as it's known locally, it's just a really evocative name for a start. And it's a really interesting bit of local history. It's built by mill workers during the American Civil War. Yeah. When the supply of cotton from America to the Lancashire mills was just cut off.
Leading to
mass unemployment. So as a way of providing work and income for those workers, they set about building this road across the moors.
So it's a really tangible link to quite a key historical event. I mean, obviously the American Civil War, had
massive repercussions around the world. Here's this stretch of road up on the moors above Rochdale. That is directly connected to that.
Yeah, and it's it speaks to this idea of self-reliance.
Yeah, community.
Finding ways to support themselves in times of hardship, and it's a really it's a physical reminder of that. And the worry is that these huge turbines would really dominate that landscape and kind of overshadow that heritage.
I mean, the visual impact would be pretty overwhelming, really, if you can imagine walking or cycling along that road and having these, 180-meter tall turbines towering over you. It would certainly change the character of the place quite dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a local group as well, isn't there, who are very concerned about the impact on
heritage in the area, the Ruley Moor Neighborhood Forum.
Yeah, and they have a website, rmnf.org.uk, if anyone's interested in finding out more about their work.
And this road's importance has been recognized nationally as well, hasn't it? I mean, David Olsoga featured it in one of his history programs.
Yeah, that's right. And the BBC actually put a plaque there as well to commemorate its significance. It's not just a piece of, local history that's of interest to a few people. It's something that has, a wider significance as well.
Yeah. And our interviewee was very clear about that, they said. The Cotton Famine Road is of national and international importance. It is a reminder of the harsh times cotton workers had to endure during the cotton famine in their support of the abolition of slavery, and is unique in linking the American Civil War to social changes in our own country. When a previous wind farm was proposed for this area, Rochdale Planning Committee dismissed it out of hand due to the impact on the road. So there's a precedent, of proposals being turned down in this area, specifically because of the impact on heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really interesting point, and it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out this time around.
Right. Okay. Well, let's move on now and talk about the environmental aspects of this. And one of the big concerns that's been raised is the impact on peatland, which. Obviously a very important part of the moorland ecosystem.
Yeah. And the problem is peat is a massive carbon sink. So, it stores huge amounts of carbon dioxide. And if you disturb the peat, then all of that carbon can be released into the atmosphere.
Yeah. And our interviewee really took issue with this. They said they're going to embed thousands of tons of concrete in the peat. They're talking about a moorland restoration plan. But you have to ask the question, if the moor needs restoring, why not just spend a fraction of the money that they're going to get in government subsidies, i.e. our money, and just restore the moor without any development? So
they're basically arguing that this isn't really about restoring the moorland at all. It's about building a wind farm.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point because, there is this kind of narrative around wind farms that they're that they're environmentally friendly, and that they're helping to protect the environment. But in a case like this, where you got a very sensitive habitat like peatland, there's a real question mark over whether that's actually true. Yeah, and it's not just the peatland either, is it? There are concerns about the impact on watercourses and drainage as well.
Yeah, that's right. They're worried that the construction of the wind farm could disrupt drainage patterns and lead to flooding.
There's actually a nearby wind farm called Crook Hill, which was developed by a company called Coronation Power. And there have been reports of serious flooding in that area since the wind farm was built. So that's obviously a cause for concern for people living near Scout Moor.
Yeah. And then there's this really interesting point about, the whole kind of justification for wind farms is that they reduce carbon emissions. But our source, actually, casts some doubt on that, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He has a background in physics, and he's looked into the methodologies used to assess the carbon footprint of wind farms, and he's not convinced that they are as carbon neutral as they're often made out to be.
Yeah,
and I think that's a really important point to raise because it's very easy to just kind of accept that. Renewables are good and fossil fuels are bad, but actually, when you start to look into the detail of it, it's a lot more complicated than that, isn't it?
It is. And I think one of the things that our interviewee highlighted was the fact that, the carbon payback period for a wind farm, so the time it takes for the wind farm to generate enough clean energy to offset the carbon that was emitted during its construction, and indeed the impact on the peat as well, that payback period can be a lot longer than people think.
Right. Well, let's talk now about some of the impacts on local people and kind of their daily lives. And one of the things that came up a lot in the interview was noise pollution. And I guess the worry there is that these turbines are going to be so big that they're going to make a lot more noise than the existing ones.
Yeah, and it's not just the kind of whooshing noise that you normally associate with wind turbines. There's also this issue of amplitude modulation, which electricians is a kind of thumping sound.
It's like a Foston. Rhythmic thump 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 as the blades go round.
Exactly, and it can be quite disturbing for people who live nearby. And the problem is that the current UK guidelines for wind farm noise don't really seem to take this amplitude modulation into account properly. So there's a concern that the noise assessments that are being done for Scout Moor 2 may not be giving a true picture of the impact on residents.
And it's not just noise either, is it? I mean, shadow flicker. is another issue that's been raised.
That's basically when the ROP stuff. The rotating blades of the turbine cast, moving shadows across people's houses, and it can be quite distracting and annoying, especially if you're trying to, watch TV or read a book or something.
Yeah, it is some pretty irritating. And there's also the impact on horse riders. This area is very popular with horse riders. Ruley Moor Road is part of a national trail. Right. A 45-mile equestrian route called the Mary Townley Loop. Yeah. And horses can be very sensitive to noise and movement. Yeah. So having these huge turbines there could really spook them and make it, quite dangerous for riders.
Yeah, and actually that leads into another issue that was raised in the interview, which is illegal off-roading. Yeah. Because the existing Scout Moor wind farm has actually kind of inadvertently created a bit of a problem with that, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Because when the wind farm was built, they actually had to build access roads to get to the turbines. Right. And those tracks have become a bit of a magnet for people on off-road bikes and in 4x4s and things. An hour source said, it's now become a haven for illegal off-road bikes and 4x4s with riders coming from as far away as Edinburgh. There have been many instances of the public being openly threatened when we have challenged them. It just seems to be getting worse. So it's not just a case of, a bit of noise and a bit of damage to the moorland. It's actually becoming quite a serious, public safety issue as well.
Yeah, and the concern is that with Scout Moor too, Cubico are proposing to open up even more roads to access the new turbines. So that problem could get even worse.
Yeah, it's a pretty worrying situation. Yeah. We've talked about noise, shadow flicker, horses, off-roading. I mean, it does seem like there are a lot of potential downsides for people living in the area. And then, of course, there's the visual impact as well. I mean, we've already touched on this, but these turbines are going to be absolutely massive, I see.
180 meters. I mean, that's getting on for twice the height of the existing turbine. So there would be a very dominant feature in the landscape.
Yeah. Our interviewee said, as you come into our village from Rochdale, they would dominate the skyline. Like the current ones, you will be able to see them from miles away because each one will be the height of Blackpool Tower. So they're not going to be easy to miss, are they?
No. And it's not just, the immediate area around the wind farm. That would be affected visually. Yeah. They would be visible from, miles around. And there's also a conservation area called Crickshaw, which is very close to the proposed site.
It's quite telling, isn't it, that a previous proposal to extend the existing Scout Moor wind farm was actually turned down because of the visual impact.
Yeah, that's right. A few years ago, there was an application to build what was going to be called Scout Moor 1, which was an extension to the existing site. But, it was rejected by the planning committee, mainly because of concerns about the impact on the landscape.
So there is a history of these sorts of developments being rejected in this area, and yet here we are again with an even bigger and arguably even more intrusive proposal. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Well, let's move on now and talk about the economics of all this. Yeah. Because our interviewee had some pretty strong opinions about that side of things as well.
Yeah, I did. And he's looked into the financial performance of the existing Scout Moor wind farm. Yeah. And the figures are, they're pretty eye-watering, really.
Yeah. Tell us about those. What did you find out?
So in 2023, Scout Moor had a turnover of £36 million and a profit before tax of $26.5 million. So that's a profit margin of 73%.
73%. That's a pretty healthy profit margin, isn't it? I mean, you don't see those sorts of margins in many industries these days. Yeah.
No, you don't. And the point that our source was making was that those sorts of profits are only possible because of the huge subsidies that wind farms receive from the government.
Yeah, and these subsidies, they come in various forms, don't they? I mean, there's things like contracts for difference.
Yeah. So contracts for difference basically guarantee wind farm operators a minimum price for the electricity they generate. So if the market price falls below that level, then the government tops it up.
So it's a kind of a safety net for the wind farm operators.
Exactly. And then there are constraint payments as well, which are payments that wind farms receive if they're asked to stop generating electricity because the grid can't cope with the amount of power that's being produced.
So they're basically being paid to not produce electricity.
Yeah.
Right. And then on top of that, there are all these kind of hidden subsidies as well, aren't there? I mean,
things like the impact on consumer energy bills.
Yeah, that's right. the cost of these subsidies is ultimately passed on to consumers through their energy bills. Yeah. And our source reckons that those subsidies are costing the average household around £2,000 a year.
Yeah, which is a significant sum of money.
And he was very critical of the whole kind of
financial setup of the wind farm industry, wasn't he? I mean, he said, the profits generated by the current wind farm are obscene. There is no way they could make a profit margin of 73% without massive financial support from the public. Recent analysis of Scout Moor Eye's account suggests they will make a profit of nearly £16 over its lifetime. So he's basically arguing that these wind farms are making huge profits at the expense of the taxpayer.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary of his view, and it is a very very.
I guess it raises some important questions about the way that the renewables industry is structured and on whether it's
really as beneficial as it's often made out to be. Yeah. And one of the other kind of financial aspects of this is that the cost of reinforcing the grid so that it can cope with all this extra electricity from wind farms.
Yeah.
That cost is not being borne by the wind farm developers.
No, it's being passed on to the consumer.
Right. So again, it's the taxpayer who's picking up the tab.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, well, let's move on now and talk a bit about the local politics of this. Because it seems like there's quite a bit of disagreement locally about whether this wind farm is a good idea or not.
Yeah, it's a very divisive issue. And the two local MPs, Elsie Blundell and Andy McCanney, they've both come out in support of Scout Moor too.
Yeah.
And that's a significant factor in all of this.
It's going to be quite hard to oppose something when you've got both your local MPs backing it, and the local council as well, Rossendale Borough Council. They seem to be they've kind of factored in the income that they would get from land rental for this wind farm into their financial projections.
Yeah, our source described that as problematic, to say the least.
Yeah, it's a bit worrying, isn't it? Because it kind of suggests that they've already made up their minds about this before. All the evidence has been considered.
And I think there's a wider concern as well that because the government is so strongly behind the expansion of onshore wind that this whole planning process is just going to be a rubber stamping exercise.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people who are opposed to this development is that there's a real sense of apathy. I mean, a lot of people just think, oh well, it's going to happen anyway. So what's the point in trying to fight it?
Yeah, it's that sense of inevitability.
Yeah.
Which is
very hard to overcome. And our source actually talked about this. He said, our MP Elsie Blundell made specific reference to her pride in the Cotton Famine Road in her maiden speech, yet here she is supporting the destruction of a unique heritage asset. It really shakes your faith in democracy.
So there's a real, there's a sense of disillusionment there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that we're seeing more and more these days. Where people feel like they're not being listened to by their elected representatives.
Yeah.
And that, decisions are being made that are not in their best interest.
Right. Okay. Well, let's zoom out a bit now.
Yeah.
And talk about it.
The wider context of all this.
Yeah.
Energy policy in the UK and globally. And one of the things that our interviewee pointed out was that there's been a lot of talk about, the government lifting the ban on onshore wind. But he was quite keen to clarify that.
Yeah, he said that the so-called ban was never really a ban at all. It was just that the subsidies for onshore wind were removed, and so that made them less financially viable.
Less financially viable. Right. So it's more about economics than it is about policy as such.
Yeah, exactly. And now that the subsidies are being reintroduced, then obviously, wind farms are becoming
more attractive again.
And there's also a really interesting comparison, isn't there, between the level of investment in wind energy compared to
nuclear power is arguably a much more reliable source of energy. Because it's not, dependent on the weather.
Yeah.
But the government is putting far more money into wind than it is into nuclear.
Yeah.
And that's despite the fact that nuclear has a potential to provide, base load power, which is what we really need if we're going to decarbonize the grid.
And also as well, there's this argument that the UK's carbon emissions are so small compared to global emissions that actually anything we do is going to have very little impact.
Yeah. we're responsible for about 1% of global emissions. Yeah. So, even if we went completely carbon neutral tomorrow, it wouldn't make a huge amount of difference to the global picture.
And our interviewee. Yeah. He was quite scathing, really, about the whole kind of net zero agenda.
Yeah, he called it insane.
Yeah, he said, I asked my MP, Elsie Blindell, to find out how much will current net zero policy reduce global temperature. She forwarded the question to Ed Miliband's Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. His climate minister came back to me, but she could not answer the question because the government simply does not know. Even if we turned off the whole of the UK tomorrow, it would have no impact on global temperature. Therefore, we are spending hundreds of billions of pounds on net zero and have absolutely no idea of whether it will deliver any benefits. This is insane. So he's basically saying that, we're spending all this money on trying to achieve net zero. We don't even know if it's going to make any difference. Yeah. And I think that's a point that that a lot of people are starting to make now. There's this kind of sense that the net zero agenda has become a bit of a runaway train. And that, the costs are spiraling out of control. Yeah. And nobody's really stopping to ask, is this really the best way to do things?
Yeah. And it's interesting as well, isn't it? Because our source is actually he's very very aware of the climate change issue. He's not like a climate change denier or anything like that.
No,
but he just thinks that the way that we're going about it is completely the wrong way.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Right. Okay. Let's talk finally about the group who are opposing this development. And it sounds like a pretty pretty unequal battle, really.
Yeah, it does. You've got this big, powerful multinational company, Cubico, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you've got this small group of local residents who are, giving up their time and their energy to try and fight this thing.
But
it's not like they're,
completely uninformed. I mean, they do have some expertise within their ranks, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. They've got people with with knowledge of
planning law and noise assessment and ecology, and all sorts of relevant areas. Yeah. So they are putting up a a well-informed fight.
Yeah, but they are very much the underdogs in this. And our interviewee kind of alluded to that when he said, remember what's happening here is we're just a group of normal people volunteering in our spare time. It's very hard to really challenge a company that has effectively limitless resources. We have launched a campaign website at saying no to scoutmoor2.org.uk to help us be more effective. So if you do want to find out more about their campaign and maybe even support it, then you can go to that website.
Right. Well, look, we've covered an awful lot of ground there. I think it's been really really interesting to kind of delve into this in so much detail.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example of how, a seemingly local issue connects.
Raise all sorts of these much bigger questions about energy policy and about the way that we balance
the needs of people and communities.
Yeah. And I think what's been really striking for me is the sheer scale of these turbines. I mean, I knew they were big, but I didn't quite appreciate just how big they were going to be. And I think that's going to be a really significant factor in this whole debate.
Yeah, and also I think the financial aspects of it are really interesting as well. The fact that these wind farms are making such huge profits. At the expense of the taxpayer.
Yeah, it really does. Make me think about whether this is the best way to be going about things.
It does.
And then there's the Hoga, the whole issue of the Cotton Famine Road and the heritage of the area. I mean, it's just a really complex issue with so many different facets to it.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to this question of what is sustainable progress. Are we willing to sacrifice our heritage and our environment in the name of tackling climate change? And if so, to what extent?
Yeah. It's a really tough one, isn't it? And I think, as we've seen from this deep dive, there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to engage with this debate and to really think about, what their own views are on it. Yeah. And what they think is the best way forward.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.